Not so long ago, one name in the shadowy world of outlaw motorcycle clubs aroused respect and fear throughout Europe: Satudarah MC. It was born in the early 1990s in a quiet Dutch town. From an unremarkable club, it grew into a bloody power game to struggle for the monopolistic position of such well-known giants as Hell's Angels and Bandidos. Satudarah wasn't going to be just another biker gang. They were different, more brutal and relentless in their quest for supremacy. Their meteoric rise was both hallmarked and marred by extreme violence, criminal enterprises, and a fierce rivalry that too often left bodies in the streets. What goes up must come down, and it was no different for Satudarah. Soon, cops from all across Europe were taking notice, leading to a spate of jaw-dropping crackdowns that would see the club dismantled from within. Satudarah was torn limb from limb by betrayals, undercover stings, and brutal power struggles. But what really brought them low? The answers are more twisted than you might imagine. From explosive internal wars to unexpected alliances, the story of Satudarah is a cautionary tale of how even the strongest fall when its enemies, and even its own members, turn their back on them. The Satudarah MC story began in 1990 in the small Dutch town of Moordrecht, when a group of young men with their roots in the Maluku Islands, an Indonesian archipelago that once was a colony of the Netherlands, decided to create a brotherhood unlike others. These men were second-generation immigrants who got caught between two worlds: the traditional values of their heritage and the rough European reality. Thus, Satudarah, a Maluku word that means one blood, served as the banner under which they rode. It was synonymous with unity and strength. Ever since its early days, Satudarah broke with convention for a typical motorcycle club. Many well-known clubs, including the Hells Angels and Bandidos, had strict ethnic or racial prerequisites for an initiated member. But Satudarah was open to everyone. This embracive approach attracted a wide array of members: Indonesians, Surinamese, Moroccans, and even native Dutchmen, who were united by the feeling of brotherhood and loyalty. It was this very diversity that turned out to be one of Satudarah's greatest strengths, enabling them to grow very fast in a relatively very short period. The bigger the club got, the bigger its ambitions. By the mid-1990s, Satudarah was not just a local club. They started opening chapters all over the Netherlands. More than anything, however, it was the practices of brutal violence and the readiness to brawl with anyone that singled them out for attention. Satudarah was not content being simply one more motorcycle club. It aimed big and vile, and for that, it needed to go outside the Dutch borders. The first big move of Satudarah outside the Netherlands was to Denmark, where they established their very first foreign chapter. This was a very bold and strategic move, as their clubhouse would put them right in the heart of Hell's Angels territory, one of the world's most powerful and feared motorcycle clubs. The Hells Angels had long ruled over Europe, mostly unchallenged, with periodic allies like the Bandidos. For Satudarah to be successful, they had to meet these giants head-on. The Hells Angels and Bandidos took quick note of the threatening Satudarah growth. In contrast to most of the startup clubs, which eventually disappeared, Satudarah was an altogether different story. It was inclusive, giving it the opportunity to recruit from a very broad base of people, and its reputation for brutality became part of its attraction. Before long, they would have chapters not just in Denmark, but across Scandinavia and other parts of Europe. By the end of the 1990s, Satudarah had established itself as one of the largest and most feared bike clubs in Europe. But this only marked the beginning. The rise of the club was meteoric, but it soon found out that the higher you climb, the harder you fall. Satudarah MC's journey to power was paved with violence, setting them apart from other motorcycle clubs early on. What began as a tight-knit street gang in Moordrecht quickly evolved into something far more dangerous. While many biker clubs engaged in occasional skirmishes to assert dominance, Satudarah took it to a whole new level. Their willingness to use extreme violence became their trademark, earning them a reputation that struck fear into both rivals and civilians alike. One of the most defining moments in Satudarah's violent rise was their clash with the Hells Angels in Denmark in 2014. What started as a simple insult turned into an all-out brawl that spilled into the streets. At a bar in Copenhagen, a Hells Angels prospect arrogantly dismissed Satudarah as nothing more than a street gang, a slight that Satudarah members didn't take lightly. Within moments, knives were drawn, guns were fired, and chaos erupted. The violence didn't end at the bar. It spread to a nearby park and a parking lot, leaving the area looking like a war zone. By the time the police arrived, 28 people were arrested, with several members from both clubs injured. This was no ordinary bar fight. It was a clear declaration of war. This incident wasn't isolated. It was emblematic of how Satudarah operated. They didn't just fight, they aimed to annihilate. This approach wasn't just about defending their turf. It was about sending a message to the entire underworld. Satudarah wasn't going to back down, no matter who their opponents were. Their members embraced violence as a means to an end, using it to quickly establish themselves as a dominant force in the European biker scene. The transition from a street gang to a full-fledged motorcycle club didn't happen overnight, but violence was a constant theme throughout. In the early days, many Satudarah members didn't even own motorcycles. Their focus was on brotherhood and survival in a harsh environment. As they expanded, however, they adopted the symbols and structure of traditional motorcycle clubs, which gave them a sense of legitimacy and helped attract new members. Yet, unlike other clubs that tried to maintain a veneer of respectability, Satudarah reveled in their outlaw status. Their brutal methods also extended beyond street fights. Satudarah quickly became involved in organized crime, including drug trafficking, arms smuggling, and extortion. Their operations grew more sophisticated, and with that came more violence. Rivals who dared to challenge them often found themselves at the receiving end of a brutal beating, or worse. This ruthless approach allowed Satudarah to carve out a significant piece of the criminal underworld, but it also put them on a collision course with law enforcement. Inevitably, Satudarah MC's rise to power pitted them directly against two of the most feared forces in the motorcycle club world, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos. These two clubs had been lords over the European biker scene for a long time, and Satudarah's expansion was very aggressive. Therefore, it represented a serious threat to its supremacy. Tumbling out of this was a grim, escalating conflict of interests, tension, violence, and fleeting truces that never seemed to hold. The rivalry with the Hells Angels was most fierce. As Satudarah expanded, it started to encroach into territories that had been dominated by the Hells Angels for years and even decades. The Hells Angels weren't famous for taking insult lying down either. They weren't about to let this upstart club undermine their dominance. Friction between the two clubs came to a head in Denmark, a key battleground for control in Scandinavia. The 2014 brawl in Copenhagen, where knives and guns turned a bar into a battlefield, marked a high point for that rivalry. However, this was not about the settling of some personal score. This incident showed all the hallmarks of the bigger war brewing between Satudarah and Hells Angels across Europe. In the wake of this explosive confrontation, both clubs finally realized that continued open warfare would prove too costly. Enter the Bandidos, another large player in the European biker scene. Historically rivals of Hells Angels, Satudarah's meteoric rise presented a new challenge and required reassessing old enmities. The three-way war would weaken all parties, so Satudarah, Hells Angels, and Bandidos met to hammer out a truce represented by each of the parties. The truce, however, was anything but solid. It was more of a temporary ceasefire, born of necessity rather than genuine peace. This merely allowed the clubs not to have to fight continuously with one another, but to focus on consolidation. All the same, the tensions remained. Satudarah continued its aggressive expansion, and its rejection of traditional biker codes, like strict ethnic membership requirements, only exacerbated the anger from the Hells Angels, who saw this as an attack on their very way of life. This uneasy peace didn't last long. As Satudarah's membership swelled, so did its power, and it began taking over criminal enterprises that were previously controlled by the Hells Angels and Bandidos. This fragile truce was shattered when territorial disputes turned violent once more. Incidents of arson, assaults, and even assassinations became disturbingly common as the three clubs jockeyed for control. The Hells Angels saw Satudarah's actions as a threat to their very legacy and reacted with hostility. In so doing, the Bandidos put themselves in a tight corner. While they were ready to ally with Satudarah against Hells Angels from the start, relentless ambition made Satudarah a deadly ally. As things finally became critical, it came a time when the Bandidos had to take sides lest they get roped into an almost inevitable crossfire. As Satudarah MC solidified its grip on the European biker scene, their operations expanded far beyond the bounds of motorcycle culture. What began as a local gang with a focus on brotherhood and loyalty quickly morphed into a highly organized criminal enterprise. Satudarah's ventures into drug smuggling, arms trafficking, and extortion not only fueled their rise, but also caught the attention of law enforcement across Europe. Drug smuggling became one of Satudarah's most lucrative activities. Leveraging their expanding network of chapters across Europe, the club began to move large quantities of narcotics across borders. They were no longer dealing in small-time street sales. Satudarah was involved in major trafficking operations, bringing in drugs from South America and Asia, and distributing them throughout Europe. This elevated them from a regional threat to an international criminal syndicate, making them a top target for law enforcement agencies. In addition to drugs, Satudarah was heavily involved in arms trafficking. The club capitalized on the black market demand for firearms, supplying weapons to other criminal organizations, and sometimes even to their own members for use in violent confrontations with rivals. Their involvement in smuggling automatic weapons into countries like Germany highlighted the sophistication of their operations. These activities weren't just about making money, they were about power. Controlling the flow of weapons gave Satudarah leverage in their ongoing battles with rival clubs and established their dominance in the criminal underworld. Extortion was another area where Satudarah excelled. Businesses, both legitimate and illegitimate, found themselves under the club's control. Protection rackets became a common tool for Satudarah to exert influence, with local business owners forced to pay for the privilege of not being targeted by the club's enforcers. This practice extended beyond the Netherlands to other countries where Satudarah had established chapters, spreading fear and tightening their grip on various territories. As Satudarah expanded its operations, their ambitions extended beyond Europe. The club set its sights on other regions, notably Southeast Asia and Australia. Indonesia, the ancestral homeland of many of its founding members, became a key area of influence. Here, Satudarah found a welcoming environment for their operations, allowing them to further grow their criminal empire. Their attempt to establish a foothold in Australia, however, was met with immediate resistance. Australian law enforcement, well aware of the club's reputation, quickly moved to dismantle their operations, leading to the arrest of several senior members and the disruption of their plans. With Satudarah's criminal activities reaching such a large scale, law enforcement across Europe intensified their efforts to bring the club down. The 2015 crackdown in Germany marked the beginning of a sustained campaign against Satudarah. German authorities banned the club outright, leading to widespread raids and arrests. This crackdown set a precedent, and soon other countries followed suit. The Netherlands, where Satudarah had its roots, also moved to outlaw the club, with the Dutch Supreme Court upholding the ban in 2018. The most serious legal sweeps against Satudarah MC date from 2015, when the German authorities proceeded decisively to dissolve the activities of the club on its territory. By that time, Satudarah had long penetrated inside Germany and already constituted one of the top-rated heavyweights on the country's criminal landscape. The drug deals, weapon smuggling, and bloody aftermaths of clashes with other mobs placed it high for a long while at the top of law enforcement wanted sheets. The nadir was when German fiends, disturbed at how far their foul deeds had gone, declared an outright ban on Satudarah. That ban, by then Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière, followed with a stiff blow on Satudarah. It was the first such action ever taken against the club by a European government, and represented an approach of zero tolerance toward their existence in the country. The ban was not just symbolic, but represented the first of a well-coordinated series of actions taking place all over Germany, where raiders started to knock at the doors of the Satudarah's still operating local chapters, clubhouses, and homes of high-ranking members. A good number of arrests, the seizing of weapons and drugs, and the shuttering of several clubhouses promptly ensued. That move, immediate and devastating, was a true shot across the bow of the club leadership. Impressed with Germany's success, other parts of Europe were starting actions against Satudarah. Most interested were home country, the Netherlands, in containing their growth. Long-watched Satudarah activities in the Netherlands moved in 2018 as a Dutch government-devised policy outlawed it totally. First of its kind in that country, ruling by the Dutch Supreme Court prohibiting Satudarah, asserted that the motorcycle club did indeed trouble the order and safety of the public. The verdict did not only include the national organization, but also the local branches, the affiliated support clubs, and as such, crushed the entire network within the country. Heavy repression ensued in the Netherlands after the ban. The police launched a far-reaching manhunt, raiding not only Satudarah properties, but also those of presumed members. These were heavy, relentless raids that resulted in the arrest of many members and a large amount of drugs, weapons, and money being confiscated. The magnitude of the operation reflected the regard that Dutch authorities had for Satudarah and the menace it posed. The chieftains literally crippled Satudarah's operation throughout the Netherlands, effectively dismantling them to retreat and regroup. These legal efforts across Europe did not just disrupt Satudarah's activities, it fractured the power base of the club and instigated infighting, leading to the eventual disbanding of several chapters. The 2015 German ban was like the first falling domino. Satudarah's once formidable empire across Europe began to crumble under relentless pressure through coordinated efforts of law enforcement. Although the club still does exist, most notably in Indonesia, their influence in Europe has been severely reduced, a mere shadow of what it was before. It was as if the more the hold of law tightened around the activities of Satudarah MC, the more it contracted on itself. What was once a tightly run ship started to take on water under the weight of betrayals, internal disputes, and the never-ending infiltration of the gang by law enforcement. These organizational breaches were brought to an entire new level of intensity only by the severity of the legal actions taken against them, leading to a knocking over effect of sorts, in which internal strife raged and saw the physical downfall of numerous individual chapters. The biggest blows to Satudarah were of its own internal making. Police were determined to see the club topple, and have managed to infiltrate Satudarah with informants and undercover police at high levels. Those infiltrators produced vital intelligence leading to some high-profile arrests, but also helped sow seeds of distrust among members. This led to debilitating paranoia. Members suspected each other of being snitches, and this suspicion caused several of the high-ranking members to turn on each other to avoid prison time. That once unbreakable bond of loyalty that held Satudarah together was now rife with fear and betrayal. The demise of these benchmark chapters in so many ways not only highlighted the end of Satudarah within those geographical regions, but also continued to help foment new groups to fill the power vacuum that continued to exist in the wake of this exit. Foremost among these was Old KMC, an ex-forwarded Satudarah-based club formed by members dissatisfied with the debacle. But the arrival of Old KMC did not end things. It instead led to new conflicts. The former comrades at arms now devoured each other, breaking necks in violent skirmishes over turf and hegemony. These new battles further fragmented what was left of Satudarah's influence as Old KMC and remaining Satudarah factions fought bitterly against one another. In the end, the infighting and fragmentation within Satudarah MC not only weakened the club, but fundamentally changed the biker landscape in Europe. The final blow to Satudarah MC in Europe came in 2024 when Norway finally forced a ban on the club. Years of increasing pressure from the law, indefatigable policing, and disarray from within taking their toll. More than a judicial decree, it really was a symbolic end to Satudarah's one-time proud dominance in Scandinavia. The Norwegians had simply not given up in the chase and had been relentlessly dismantling the operations of the club through raids, arrests, and courts of law. At the end of these efforts, the ban was the clearest message that went out to Satudarah. It was no longer welcome. Norway's determination would probably leave remnants of hope with the club to finally be extinguished from the region, leaving the Scandinavian chapters in disarray. The disintegration of the club in Denmark soon followed, marking the closure of Satudarah's epic in Northern Europe. In Denmark, the club had already been weakened by internal conflicts, law enforcement actions, and growing disillusionment among its members. That was when the final blow came. The remaining members couldn't bear the pressure, and, in isolation, dissolved or changed into other entities like Old KMC. The relentless crackdown of the European authorities and the internal betrayals have left deep scars. Therein is the matter of whether the club Satudarah can ever recover. For any attempt to restore the club to its former glory, the legacy of violence and betrayal will still be on an uphill battle in most people's minds. The shocking downfall of Satudarah MC serves as a stark reminder of how quickly power can erode when faced with both external pressures and internal betrayals. Once a formidable force in the biker world, Satudarah's rise and fall highlight the volatile nature of such organizations. Their impact on the European biker scene is undeniable, leaving a legacy of violence and chaos that will not be forgotten soon. If you found this exploration of Satudarah's turbulent history intriguing, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs.